The moment you finally ask for help is usually the moment you're too far gone to actually get it. Hey, friend, welcome to the Art of Managing Your Brain podcast. I'm Dr. Charlie Hornace. Before we dive into this important topic today, I want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you've been struggling with burnout, with overwhelm, or just feeling like you're carrying too much alone, everything we talk about on this podcast, BetterHelp makes therapy accessible and convenient. I'm going to tell you more about it later in the show. But if you're ready to get started now, why don't you run over to betterhelp.com/art of. And while you're there, you're going to get an exclusive offer as my listener of 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/art of. I'll meet you back here.
I'm Dr. Charlie Hornace, highly anxious people pleaser turned master certified professional life coach. Learning to manage my brain was so life-changing for me that I got certified so that I could teach these incredible evidence-based practices to you. Are you ready for massive change? Let's go.
Have you ever been so deep in a situation you didn't even realize that you needed help? Maybe you were overloaded at work, but didn't want to seem incompetent. Maybe you were juggling everything at home, but felt like it was just what women do. Maybe you were managing impossible expectations, but thought asking for help would make you look weak. And then when you finally said, I cannot do this alone any longer, people looked at you like you were the problem. They acted like you should have spoken up sooner. They minimized it, made it seem like an overreaction. And suddenly, instead of getting help, you felt like a failure. Look, here's the reason this happens. Women are socialized not to ask for help, not because we don't need it, not because we don't deserve it, but because we've been trained to believe our worth is tied to how much we can handle alone. And by the time we finally break and we say, I need support, the system was already primed to doubt you. Today's episode, it's not just about why you don't ask for help. It's about why you were trained not to, and exactly how to break that conditioning without burning your life down in the process. No, you don't need to go scorched earth on this. So we're going to talk about the cognitive load and decision fatigue. Here's a fact. Women don't just have a lot on their plate. You are carrying around invisible mental weight that no one even seems to notice. Here's an insight from a recent Harvard Business Review study. Women are disproportionately expected to handle the invisible labor, or keeping everything running, both at home and at work. So your prefrontal cortex, it's the part of the brain that processes decision making. So that's your adult brain, your evolved thinking brain. And it's kind of the opposite of your survival brain, your lizard brain. And when your prefrontal cortex gets overloaded, it starts making even the most basic choices feel entirely overwhelming. This is why you can handle million-dollar projects pristinely, but choosing dinner sounds like a nightmare. Maybe you eat pizza 5 nights in a row because it's just too much. This is why you can keep your boss's schedule running perfectly, but your own calendar can sometimes feel like a hot mess of ADHD chaos. This is why you're so mentally exhausted you can't even decide what show to watch when you absolutely just want to veg out and do nothing and eat the pizza anyway. I mean, Netflix and chill sounds so not complicated until it is. So we need solution, and we need solution fast. How do we disrupt the cycle? Let's jump into solution right away and talk about how we can disrupt the cycle. Here's some quick tips. Micro breaks, 60 seconds of detachment resets your brain. Decision simplification. Reduce low impact choices to autopilot. Just choose. If it's a low impact choice, choose. What do you like? Blue or green? Choose. Don't make it a big deal. Don't let yourself make it a big deal. Don't get stuck in the rigor of rigorousness. Just choose. Self-permission. Stop treating doing it all as a badge of honor. It is not a badge of honor. Stop doing it all. Stop it. Here's the next bit. We're going to talk about the fawning trauma response. Why women minimize themselves instead of asking for help. So you've heard of fight or flight. You've probably also heard of freeze. I'm sure one of us can relate to any of those three at any given time. But there's a fourth trauma response. And I've mentioned it before, but I want to dig in just a little deeper on it today. This is called fawning. And it's why women don't stand up for themselves, why they don't ask for help, and why they don't push back against toxic workplaces. Here's some somatic psychology research. Women who experience chronic workplace microaggressions show increased vagal shutdown responses. Now, what does that mean? That means your nervous system literally inhibits your ability to push back. Your nervous system literally makes it impossible for you to push back. And this is a little bit of good news, because what this means is this is not your fault. You have done nothing wrong. When you are in a toxic environment, a hostile environment, a dysfunctional environment, your body takes over. It's protecting you. So there's more to this. Let's talk about what's called the polyvagal theory. This explains why women freeze instead of resist. This is about how social conditioning, socialization that we have been immersed in, and everyone around us has been immersed in our entire lives, how social conditioning rewires the nervous system to tolerate disrespect, to tolerate avoiding confrontation. So what are the solutions to this type of physiology, this type of neurobiology that's happening without you knowing, without your awareness? Often, we have to rewire your nervous system. That's the solution. We've got to recognize the fawn response in real time. We've got to use nervous system resets. Those are simple things like cold exposure, breath work, tactical disengagement, as in you're intentional about running away. Seriously, get out of there tactically, strategically. Shift from placating to strategic boundary setting. And boundaries, just FYI, are what you decide you will do when the other person transgresses your boundary. Again, here's the key. Expect they will transgress your boundary. Again, if they've already done it more than once, that means they think it's okay to transgress your boundary, whether you've told them not to or not. That means they will do it again. Expect it. Decide what you will do to disengage, as in tactically run away, when they do it again. Then you have to follow through. So if you say, if you do this, I'm going to do that, then you better do that, right? They will do it again. Do not get blindsided when somebody transgresses your boundary a third time. You're not going to change them. You're not going to threaten them. You're not going to convince them. They think what they're doing is fine. That's why they're doing it. What you can do is give them a nice little friendly warning that if they keep it up, you will simply walk away or disengage or get out of the car or whatever it is you need to do to protect your space. They don't have to stop doing what they're doing. They just can't do it around you. If they want you to stick around, then they better cut they're crap. But then you have to follow through with your decision. So it has to be something you're actually going to do. If you do this, I will do that. When they do it, not if, when they do it, you have got to follow through and do your thing that you're going to do. Most important part of boundaries. But look, this is going to take practice, learning, and having the right support to walk you through all of this kind of work and give you non-judgmental feedback. And here's a real kicker. By the time you finally break and you say, I need support, the system is already primed to doubt you. It's infuriating. And that's why learning to rewire your brain out of this conditioning is everything.
Now I want to get into the step-by-step of how to actually do this stuff. But before we get into that, I just want to take a quick moment to tell you more about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're replaying a conversation from work at 2 a.m. You're analyzing every word. You're wondering if you should have spoken up differently. The shoulda, coulda, wouldas you're beating yourself over the head with. Or maybe you've started hiding in the break room between meetings just to catch your breath. I've been there. And if you're stuck in your head, spiraling through every worst case scenario, therapy is a game changer. And look, I know what you're thinking. Where do I even start? Finding the right therapist is overwhelming. What if it's awkward? Who has time for commuting? I don't have time on my busy schedule. I've got soccer practice every night with Timmy. What if it's not a good fit? Listen, that's why I love BetterHelp. They've made therapy actually accessible for us, flexible, and built around you. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and 5 million therapy interactions every month. Whether you prefer video sessions, live chat, or messaging, it's all virtual. You can get matched with a therapist in practically 48 hours. And if it's not a good fit, you can switch anytime. There's no extra charge. There's no hurt feelings. There's no awkwardness. So if you've been waiting for a sign, my friend, this is it. And here's my special offer just for you. As my listener, you're going to get 10% off your first month with my exclusive link. You go to betterhelp.com/art of to get started today. You don't have to wait until your breaking point. You don't have to figure it all out alone. Therapy is here when you're ready. So head to betterhelp.com/art of and grab that 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/art of.
All right. I want to give you a lot of information really quickly so that we can get you started. First step would be recognizing the Fawn response in real time. The only way to get there is by becoming aware at all. You may become aware the next day, a week later. You may think back on something or ruminate overnight and say, oh, I was fawning. There's a fawn. Just the awareness of it changes everything. Instead of blaming yourself, instead of taking on a bunch of shit that's not yours, you can just recognize the fawn response. And the more you just identify it and recognize it and let go of your self-worth being tied to whatever the situation was, every time you just recognize and become aware that you're fawning, you're going to decrease the gap between your awareness and the real-time situation until eventually you will become aware in the moment. But you have to practice. You will use nervous system resets, very simple stuff. If you're dealing with toxic people, you don't have to stay there. Nobody says you have to listen to them. Shift from placating toxic situations that are absolutely responses to socialized situations everyone has been immersed in. People don't even know most of the time they're doing it. Instead of placating this crap, strategic boundary setting is what you need. What would be a solution to all of this like neurophysiological stuff that kind of seems like it's out of your control? We have got to rewire your nervous system. It's just like managing your brain. Your nervous system is part of that entire system, and we have to manage it. You cannot be emotionally dysregulated. We have to regulate your emotions. We need to recognize, first off, that fawn response in real time. So what does that mean? That means even if 24 hours later, you've identified that you had a moment of fawning, of placating, that understanding that you were people pleasing, maybe as a reaction to a situation you were uncomfortable in. It could be a week later. It doesn't matter. Instead of owning that, instead of tying your self-worth to that, instead of it being some sort of like moral failure judgment on yourself, just identify that you did it. Just say, oh, I was people pleasing. Oh, I was fawning. Look at that. The more that you can become aware that you've done something, put your finger on it, identify it with real words that you can articulate. The more you do that, the more you minimize the gap between awareness and real time. And soon, with practice, you will become aware in the moment, and you will take control of the moment instead of being victim to trauma responses like fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Start recognizing it. No moral judgment on yourself. Just say, I did it. Look at that. It'll get so much easier. You also need to use nervous system resets. These are the simple things that I talk about all the time. That's always good. It totally kickstarts your brain. Breath work. But breathing, again, not hippy dippy, though there's nothing wrong with that. You actually have to be getting oxygen to your brain so that you can kickstart your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain. Because when you're in these moments of trauma response, your thinking brain is not in control. Your survival mechanism is your lizard brain is making choices. So all of the blood has left your thinking brain and run to your survival mechanism because it thinks you're going to have to run away or fight. It's not true. If you can get oxygen back to your thinking brain, then you can start thinking again. You don't have to be there. Nobody says you have to stand there and listen to bullshit. You get to decide. If you feel frustrated, if you feel annoyed, if you feel sad, if you feel angry, if you feel whatever emotion, it's your emotion and you get to feel it. And if you don't like it, you get to tactically run away. Just do that. Just turn around and leave. Nothing's wrong with that. You will be shifting from placating or people pleasing to strategic boundary setting. But here's the real kicker. By the time you finally break and you say, I need support, the system is already primed to doubt you, to judge you, to second guess you. It's beyond infuriating, but this takes practice. It takes learning. It takes having the right support to walk you through it and give you non-judgmental, non-biased feedback. And that's why learning to rewire your brain, learning this art of managing your brain out of this conditioning is everything.
Let's talk about how to break out of this cycle once and for all. Now we're going to talk about this systemic gaslighting loop. Why women's burnout is not taken seriously. It's so frustrating. Women finally speak up and they're told they're overreacting. Women finally say, I can't do this alone, and they're told they should have spoken up sooner. A study from 2023 at Yale University tells us that women who express frustration are labeled as emotional or difficult, while men with identical behaviors are seen as assertive. This is not a personality flaw. It's systemic. Here's a neuroscience insight. The brain's reticular activating system, or RAS, makes us hyper aware of social rejection, which is why women constantly second guess whether they overreacted instead of recognizing covert bias in real time. Instead of dealing with bad behavior, you got called overreacting. And now you're over there feeling like, bad about yourself because apparently you're an overreactor. No, you need to recognize covert bias, how to reframe it in the moment. You need to train your brain to categorize bias as systemic, not personal. It's not about you. You need to take out the personalization of this because it's a system. You're just getting beat up by a system and you don't have to participate. So when we're dealing with all of this microaggression and gaslighting and cognitive dissonance and just like blah, 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 right? How do we solve the problem? How do you reframe gaslighting in the moment? Well, we're going to run this through what we call the model. And if you're not familiar with that, there is a interactive workbook on my website, charliehornacecoaching.com, on all the pages at the bottom, and you can grab that. We're going to train your brain to categorize bias as systemic, not personal. It's not personal. This is a system. You need to get in the plane, get up there, and look down at the system with me. We're going to use cognitive scaffolding techniques to maintain your confidence. You need to know exactly step by step how to do some of this stuff. So let's do a really quick live quote unquote case study on the thought work power framework. So here's the scenario. Your boss minimizes your contributions in a meeting, but when you try to address it later, you're told you're too sensitive. So let's break this down. You have your 5 lines in the model, the C line, T line, F line, A line, R line. Circumstance, thought, feeling, action, result. So the circumstance is neutral. It's a thing that happens that you interpret. So the circumstance is that your boss dismisses your idea. Dismissing can be an opinion, but if it's not taken into account and put into action, it can be dismissed. You have a thought. Maybe I am overreacting. That causes a feeling, self-doubt and hesitation within you. That makes you take an action, often to get rid of that feeling. So you shrink back. You take less space up. What does that do? It gives you a result. You reinforce their perception that your ideas aren't valuable. You also reinforce your own perception that your ideas aren't valuable. None of that's true. We need to reframe this in real time. So instead of having the thought, maybe I am overreacting, why don't we try a new thought? Catch the first thought, identify it as crap, and let's give it a new one. How about bias exists in the system, not in my abilities? Depersonalize it. It exists in the system. It makes sense that they would have bias against you because you're in a system that is biased. It actually has no reflection on your abilities, even if somebody says it out loud, because they're not capable of challenging the thoughts their brain invents on the spot. They take them at face value. You're smarter than that. Challenge the thoughts. So here's your new action. With the new thought that bias exists in the system and not in your ability, you can push back with confidence because it's not about you. It's not even about them. It's a system and you don't have to play. Then you get a new result. You keep your seat at the table without internalizing the system's bullshit, without shrinking, without worrying you're taking up too much space just by breathing. It's not in my abilities because it's not. You're living in systemic bias. That means people are going to be biased against you for all kinds of reasons, and you're not going to change them. Just like you have your own bias about other people, they're not going to change you. They exist in a system. It has nothing to do with your abilities. What people think about your abilities has nothing to do with you because it's them interpreting the world. That's what creates their thoughts and their feelings, their actions, and their results. And often the nonsense that comes out of their mouth because they don't know how to challenge made up thoughts in their brain. This is the most important thing you can take home today. You don't have to put up with the bullshit in the system. You don't. And when you get overwhelmed, I need you to get support and undo this conditioning for good. All right. If this episode has hit home, I hope that you will share it. I hope that you will tag a woman in your life who needs this conversation. And remember, if you're ready to get real support, I invite you to go to betterhelp.com/art of and grab that 10% off as my listener, an exclusive offer of your first month. You don't want to wait until your breaking point. You don't have to prove your worth by doing it alone. You don't. Get the tools that you need and get them now. All right. I'll see you next week.